Behind the Shades.
On Easter, I'm not sure, that had to be in April, end of April, I think, that year. He decided, well, actually, a couple days before that, I told him I was taking him to the emergency room. And he said, no, let's wait till Sunday, Easter Sunday, because nobody's going to be in the ER that day unless they absolutely need to be. So because he didn't want to wait around forever. So we went and they admitted him for pneumonia. They actually even tested him, and we couldn't have contact at that time. They tested him for TB, tuberculosis, tested him for a bunch of stuff, did a couple CAT scans and x-rays, and he was in there maybe about a week. And then they finally decided, okay, you can be treated at home. So he was sent home, and it wasn't maybe a week or so later, same thing, in the middle of the week, I told him, I'm taking you up to a different ER, an hour away. And he said, no, let's wait till Sunday. It's Mother's Day. It won't be crowded. So we waited, we went, and they, gave him the regular, temperature check and all that, the triage thing. And when we told the doctor, she was a resident, we told her that he'd been sick for a long time and he'd actually been hospitalized. She went and she looked up his records and came back in and said, did they talk to you about a mass they found in his lungs? They completely missed it at the previous hospital. So he was admitted there for about a week to get him stable and sent him home. And he didn't last there very long. He ended up, he had a mini stroke, and we didn't know it at the time, but a heart attack. And of course, I recognized the signs of the stroke right away and dialed 911. They came and got him, took him to the first hospital. And I said, they must have put on his chart, wife is pissed. Because I kept saying, I don't want him here. I said, do whatever you take, helicopter him or whatever. I want him to go to the other hospital. Well, they said he was too sick to transport. And he needed to be there. He ended up with the chief of cardiology, the chief of neurology, the chief of pulmonology. He ended up with the top doctors in all these fields at that hospital. And that's why I said there must have been a note, because they don't normally do that. And yeah, from then on, he didn't come home. And that was end of May, I think, until he passed on August 2nd of 2011. And oddly enough, August 2nd was when he passed, was exactly 10 years the day from when my father had passed. So I said, my husband knew, he did it on purpose because he knew how bad I was at remembering dates. And the hospital stay was interesting. I didn't go home. I stayed with him. I was actually working from home at the time. I think I was a pioneer in the field of working from home. And so I just brought my laptop in and set up my little office, and I worked while he watched Criminal Minds over and over again. He was a retired cop, so he loved cop shows. And it just kind of, they give us hope and then they take it away, and then they give us hope and then they take it away. It was tough. it was really rough. His passing though was so peaceful. It was actually almost beautiful. All 6 of our sons were there, and I mean they're scattered all over the country, but they were there for that, for his last week, and he was basically comatose. He wasn't really responding to anything, and they still wanted to do blood sugar testing on him. I said, forget it. There's no, why are you going to stick him again when you're not going to do anything about it? Because he wants no further treatment. And he wasn't diabetic. I don't know why they kept testing. But the day he passed, my sons and I had gone out to breakfast, and my one wonderful, at the time, wonderful sister-in-law or daughter-in-law. And we went to breakfast, and then we kind of went around and interviewed funeral homes. And we decided on one that was within my budget and just felt comfortable to us. And so we got back and sat around, with him talking, because they said that hearing is the last thing to go. But finally, I went over to him and I took his hand and I told him, everything's taken care of. It's okay to go now if you want to. And he opened his eyes for the first time in a week, looked right at me, and then slowly closed his eyes, and he was gone. So he'd heard me. And the hardest thing about that day was going home, because I hadn't been in the house again without him. And I stood at the front door with my back to the door and said, I can't go in without him, and started sitting. And my sons were standing around like, what do we do? We've never seen Mom cry before. They were so panicked. That's why my daughter-in-law, she just came and gave me a hug, and she said, it'll be okay. I heard your hand, I'll be going. And my son married the Buster. And from there, a lot of it's a blur, because you get this thing called widow fog. And you've heard of pregnancy brain. Yeah, well, widow brain is much worse. I've had 6 kids. I've had pregnancy brain. Widow brain is so much worse, and it lasts so long, where you just have trouble remembering things, where you have trouble connecting to other people. It's a very isolating thing. So after, I'd say, a couple of years, actually, I finally came out of that fog and started wondering, okay, who am I now? What am I supposed to be doing with my life? Because when you lose your partner, you're not just grieving that partner, but you're grieving the future that you thought you would have together. And it changes everything. It changes your views on life. It changes who you are at the core. And that pain, that not knowing, just the feeling of, well, why do I even get up in the morning? It's horrendous. So I Googled life purpose, and one of the first things that popped up was a course for life purpose coach certification. So I took it just to see how it would help me. And it not only helped me, but it showed me that my purpose was helping other women going through the same things. So that's my story.
And that is an amazing way to explain it. Because if I put myself in your situation, and I only can know it from the outside looking in, because I don't know specifically how it feels. I can be understanding, I can be sympathetic, because you woke up that day, that's both of you, you left the house together, not knowing that in a short period of time, only one of you will be walking back into the house. So when you approached that front door and your key is about to hit that lock, and you know that this is going to be the first night that you and your husband are not going to be able to enter this house again, how did that make you feel?
Devastated. I mean, with you saying it back to me, when I say it, I've said it so many times, I've talked about it so many times, it doesn't, it's just part of what I say. But with you repeating it back to me the way you did, yeah, it's even now, it's been over 11 years and you don't get over it. You don't. I mean, granted, I don't feel exactly the same way as I did that. Thank goodness. But it was a realization that my life was never going to be the same. And I didn't want that. Nobody does. So yeah, it's kind of surreal. Finally back at it.
I know for Cindy, I know for many people, when they're dealing with loss, they describe it as their life was one way before this person, their life became one way with this person. Now they have to relearn to live a way without this person, because life before you met this person is definitely not going to be the same after you've met this person. So what are some of the things that you are doing now to maybe continue your life forward in this new chapter?
Well, I'm a lot braver than I used to be. I would never have gone live, and I go live in my Facebook group at least once a week, and doing podcasts would never have crossed my mind. So I've become a lot braver. I've become a lot more independent. I love my independence, to come and go as I please and just live my life that's true to me and not have to answer to anyone. People have asked me, well, why don't you want to date or remarry? I said, are you kidding me? I'm happy with my life the way it is. I don't want somebody to come in and mess it up. But what I'm doing now, just talking to other widows and widowers, hearing their stories, and everybody's story is different. Everybody's grief journey is different. Nobody's going to feel exactly the same thing I felt at a certain time, like at the funeral or going back into the house without him. Nobody is going to have the exact same feelings. But eventually we do all have, nobody's going to have the exact same feelings at that time. But we do all share the feelings at one point or another. And to be able to let other widows know, especially if they're younger, I was only 54 at the time. And like I said, while my children were on their own pretty much, I still, I'm sorry. It was rough. It was rough for a while. And there are still times, like his death anniversary, his birthday, Mother's Day and Easter are not happy days for me. 4th of July is a bad day or a bad time period, for many reasons, even dating back to my father's illness. And just knowing that I can help other people through it, that I can be there for them, be their support system. that I can listen and not try to change them, not try to change what they're feeling. I can help them through it. Now, I've learned through myself, through research and through talking to other widows, I have learned some coping mechanisms that really do help. And I think for other people, just knowing that there's somebody there. Now, I didn't go to grief groups. I was not a group type person at the time. I didn't want to sit in, like I told one of my sons, I don't want to sit in a room full of people crying, because it's just going to make me cry and it's not going to solve anything. That may be completely wrong, but that's how I felt at the time. And I think what I offer is something a little more personal, a little more intimate, because especially if you're a new widow, not always ready to share those super intimate moments with a room full of people. Even if it's only 3 or 4 people, it's still to you at the time, a room full of people. And to share your grief is just, it's unbelievable. Most of my clients, most of the people in my Facebook group, it's a private Facebook group, most of them come through referrals. Frankly, I've tried placing ads and things, but widows and widowers, and they're not out there looking, for these things. Sometimes they happen across it, and that's fine. But when it comes from the heart, from somebody else, I really think, Cindy can help you. And, why don't you give her a call? Or they send me a message on Facebook. That actually is the very best way to get in touch with me. Send me a DM on Facebook. Yeah, that just makes me feel like my life still has meaning. Just because he's gone, just because I'm a different person now, I can still help others and maybe help them get through that. Who am I and what's my purpose and why should I get out of bed? That's a really rough place to be. I think a lot of us have been that way at some point or another. Say you graduate from college with this wonderful degree and you can't find a job. You still get that, okay, is this degree, is this job that I want? Is that really my purpose? Your brain starts playing games with it. But when you don't have somebody else, when you had somebody else that you could bounce this off, and then suddenly he's not there anymore, or she, it's hard. And it helps to have somebody who's been there and talk you through it.
And I think that's very important because you mentioned coping mechanisms, you mentioned what you went through, you mentioned these groups, and there are those who are uncomfortable with large groups in general. And the intimacy of the one-on-one relationship, maybe a group of 3, 4, still more than the one person, but small enough where it still feels like it's a dinner conversation, if you understand what I mean,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So what we have these days is we have people going through what they're going through because the last few years have been very difficult for other reasons.
Mhm.
But when it comes to the grief, I think we are not as equipped and prepared. And I think part of that reason is the arrogance of us. I can get through it. I'm not really supposed to show the emotion because I have to be strong, right?
That's me.
Especially when there's children involved, because as you mentioned, this is the first time that they're seeing you cry. Now, if you put it on another parent and they're the ones who's responsible for the emotional well-being of the family, they may not have in their mind, they may think they don't have the time to break down because everyone else is breaking down around them and they have to be this pillar of strength. So when you're helping yourself and when you're helping these other people who are going through it, what is maybe a stumbling block or stumbling blocks that people go through during the grieving process that you have noticed?
One thing I've noticed that pretty much everyone I've spoken to, the biggest thing, stumbling block, the thing that makes them stuck is guilt. For me, it was if I'd only gotten him to the doctor when he first started getting sick, if I'd only done something, there must have been something I could have done. I could have insisted on him going to the other hospital. Who knows, maybe they could have helped him, as it turns out. But, you just start thinking always what ifs. And others go through the what ifs, or they go through the I should have's, or they feel guilty because maybe their marriage was kind of rocky at that point, or maybe they'd had an argument just before, or maybe they weren't there with them at the time of passing. All these things come into play and mess with your brain. And the best way I got through it was to remind myself that a time machine has not been invented yet. I can't go back and change things. So if I can't change things, why should I let those thoughts invade my brain and invade me as a person? We had a good marriage, and I would hear most people who seek my help is because they had a good marriage and they can't get along without, or they didn't have a good marriage and they can't deal with the guilt they're feeling about that. They truly loved each other, but maybe things weren't ideal. And guilt is one of the biggest stumbling blocks. It's where people get stuck the most.
That's a good point that you mentioned, because that's what I would think it would be. Or if we take it a step further, maybe someone may say, why him and not me?
Oh, yeah.
Right? I was the one who was more unhealthy. Like, you start to project, right? You have this survivor's guilt saying that, well, he did everything right. She did everything right. He was healthy. She was healthy. Now, here I am, not as equipped, because that's what you feel, even though it may not be true.
Mhm.
So guilt, I can definitely see being a big one that would put the surviving spouse in a difficult situation, especially if they feel that they're unprepared, because now they're looking around and everything is on them. So as you're helping, Cindy, these people, what kind of tools, or maybe how do you coach them to continue forward with their life? Because their life does have to continue forward.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And if they've come to me like within the first week, there it's just pretty much just listening to them, picking out things that seem to be repeating, and then addressing those things slowly and carefully, because they're not ready to have this big life-changing aha moment. It's not going to happen. They're not going to feel it. They're not going to see it. So it's a slow process, and it's a careful process. And I just kind of, like, for somebody who feels like they may have or should be over it by now, I hate that. We don't get over grief. There is no expiration date on grief. You're going to feel it the rest of your life. just not as acutely as you do in the beginning. It reaches this plateau where it's just under the surface, and 98% of the time you can deal. It's that 2% of the time that sneaks up on you, even after 20 years. I had a woman, it had been 20 years, and she came to me because she was still feeling guilty about things. And so I also have them do some exercises, like if I can tell that maybe their self-esteem isn't quite what it should be, I have them, they have a week to do it, list 10 things about themselves that they like, 10 character traits that they're proud of. If they can't come up with the 10, then they need to ask friends and family or coworkers or bosses, what is it about me that makes you smile, or that makes you like me? And it's an eye-opening experience for many. They usually end up reading it back to me because they write it down. They don't have to, but usually it makes them feel so good. And to say the words out loud, it helps to reinforce. And I just tell them, pick one a day and remember that throughout the day. It'll get you at least 10 days further in. And that's what it's all about, especially in the beginning stages. It's one day at a time. So if you can move forward just this day, tomorrow will be just a hair better. So, it's little things like that to let them know that I've been there. I know other people who have been there, and we all understand. And we've not gotten past it, but gotten through it. And it's kind of like quicksand. You have to move across the top of it, because if you stop, you're going to sink. And that's what grief is like. If you don't keep moving, and you don't keep a sense of who you are, then you're going to sink deeper into despair, and it's not a place anybody wants to live in.
And that's a very good point, because sometimes we think that there's an expiry date on how we should feel, but that person, we really can't tell someone what to feel because that's their feelings, right? We can coach them to manage their feelings and manage their emotions, and so it doesn't rule over them, they rule it. But it's always going to be there. It's like the adult who has an adverse childhood experience. It's still there. They just have been able to manage it to the best of their abilities if they're going to be successful. And maybe the people who were unable to manage it successfully, they're in a much more difficult situation, because now, instead of them building their life around this emotion, the emotion is creating a life that maybe they don't necessarily want. And grief is a little bit more difficult, because there's always something around you that's going to remind you of that person. So how do we deal with that aspect of it as well, Cindy, in your opinion?
It depends on the individual. It truly does. Some women build like this little, I hate to call it that, but a little shrine, just on a table, side table, or something where the pictures hanging up, your loved ones' pictures hanging on the wall. And then on the table, there may be things that, little tchotchkes that you two picked out together, or things that have a pleasant memory, or things that, he or she loved. As long as it fits on that table, you're good. And as long as you're not like spending all day sitting over there and staring at it all, that's, that can be a healthy exercise for a lot of people. When it comes to removing them from the house, I'm not I'm not a huge proponent of that, especially right away. Now some women, they need to purge so that they're not always being reminded. But instead of purging completely, I suggest maybe they want to keep a box or a storage box of some kind and put a few things in there for later when you're saying, oh, I wish I did still have something of his. And then you can go to the box. But most of the time you forget about it because, it's packed away in the back of the closet or up in your attic or something. I still have my husband's uniform when he was a police officer. That's just something that was a big part of who he was. So, yeah, you have to play it by ear.
So going forward, Cindy, what's some advice that you want to give maybe the next group of people going into the future who want to maybe better prepare themselves for something that will be impacting each and every one of us into the future?
I have 3 things. One is feel your feelings. Don't bury them, don't swallow them, don't push them aside. Feel them, but don't wallow. You feel them and name them, but then push it aside and it's something else. So another feeling's turn to enter. The second one is you don't have to do it alone. If you have people in your life that you can talk to, that you can cry on their shoulders, literally, that you're comfortable sharing your grief with, wonderful. Use that person. Don't feel like you're being a burden to them, because someday they're going to need you for something. And if you love each other, then that's gonna, nobody keeps score. And the third thing is you can be happy while you're grieving. It's not disrespectful of your partner if you smile and sing, or you laugh, or you even actually have fun with other people. It's not disrespectful at all. And for women, well, and for men, I say to them, okay, when they were here, did they like your smile? Did they like to hear you laugh? Did they like to make you laugh? And that's what they want for you now.